If you ask players to choose one thing to represent Minecraft as a whole, many will choose the creeper. Born from a mistake, the creeper has grown to become a symbol of Minecraft. If the creeper was added today, most players would hate it. It surprises the player at seemingly random times and is very punishing. It's frustrating, but it's iconic. No one complains about the creeper's design because it has always been at the core of Minecraft. This is all to say that the design philosophy of Minecraft has shifted dramatically over the years, and in most cases, these changes have been for the better. Problems do arise when Minecraft's old design begins to feel out of place when compared to new additions, leading Mojang to add band-aid solutions. These are mechanics that haphazardly join aspects of the game designed a decade apart and ultimately feel out of place. So, how does Minecraft's current design differ from the original philosophy? The primary change is that challenges have trended more and more towards being optional. The first challenge that the player faces, being building a shelter before nightfall, is entirely mandatory. It's very rare to see modern updates force the player into facing a challenge in the same way. Most monster additions, along with their newfangled items, are structure specific. This means that the player has to seek out these challenges rather than be forced upon them. Optional challenges are not a problem. In many cases, they are more engaging than forced challenges. Minecraft is all about options and having the freedom to choose what you would like to do with the sandbox you've been given. When Mojang attempts to catch old, mandatory challenges up with the more optional philosophy of modern Minecraft is when the problems occur. Remember how building a shelter before nightfall is one of the few mandatory challenges given to the player in Minecraft? After the addition of the bed, this is no longer the case. If the player manages to collect 3 wool and 3 wooden planks before sunset, this challenge can be entirely avoided with a right click. This is a very early example of this trend, but it lays the foundation for more bandages to come as Minecraft's philosophy shifts. A challenge being optional doesn't mean that the player has more options. Prior to the addition of the bed, the player was forced to be creative and come up with a plan to survive the night, every night. Safe zones, underground tunnels, any solution that the player could think of was another option to mitigate the dangers of the night. This isn't to say that beds are bad for Minecraft or have made the game worse. Being able to set your spawn is a huge plus in terms of quality of life, but the bed is far too cheap considering the value that it generates for the player. To tone down this value, it would be interesting to see a slight nerf to its functionality. Maybe by increasing the radius that mobs prevent sleeping in order to require players to light up a larger area before being able to skip the night. To make this easier to deal with, mobs preventing sleep should be given the glowing effect, much like pillagers when you ring a bell during a raid. On the topic of sleeping, phantoms feel like a return to form in terms of non-optional challenges, but they were implemented in such a strange way. Phantoms don't spawn every night like the other core mobs. Instead, they only spawn if the player hasn't slept for several nights. This creates a feedback loop, where if the player chooses to not skip the night and instead take on the challenge, nights will become more difficult because phantoms will appear. I personally would prefer phantoms to be disconnected from sleeping entirely and instead just spawn at high elevations. If they had to remain connected to the bed, it would make more sense if phantoms spawned after players slept too many nights in a row, incentivizing them to manage their time wisely and only sleep occasionally. The benefit of Minecraft's old philosophy of mandatory challenges as opposed to the more modern philosophy of optional challenges is that the mandatory challenges require the player to adapt to emergent problems by using creative solutions. Minecraft provides countless systems for the player to use to their advantage when it comes to solving problems. In the attempt to give the player more options, a dev can actually limit their options by giving them the most optimal strategy. Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game, is a quote from Soren Johnson, the lead designer of Civ 4. In most cases, a player will opt to take the most effective option, even if that option isn't the most fun. In Minecraft, the options that the players create by themselves by utilizing the diverse system that the game offers are oftentimes the most satisfying. Changes made to combat in 1.9 are heavily criticized due to how they slowed PvP down, but it isn't mentioned as often how much shields themselves take the fun out of PvE. Why would the player attempt to adapt with new creative strategies when a shield will block 100% of incoming damage? Mobs can't do anything to counter the shield, so using one just leads to boring and slow fights. Even creepers, as long as you can react fast enough, have little impact on a player with a shield. This is another instance of Minecraft's old design clashing with its modern design. Shields give the player the option to not interact with mobs at all. Unfortunately, taking this option eliminates many other possible creative solutions that the player could have come up with to counter hostile mobs. Much like with the addition of phantoms creating a feedback loop to enforce sleeping, a buff made to skeletons in 1.9 creates a feedback loop to enforce using a shield. Skeleton AI was modified to strafe from side to side and back away from the player as they approach. This change makes dealing with skeletons without a shield feel unfair. Strafing to dodge feels inconsistent, and it's just harder to close the distance without the use of a shield. Maybe the skeletons behaved how they did pre-1.9 while the player isn't blocking, but converted to the smarter post-1.9 AI while the player is blocking. This interaction could feel more satisfying and allow for more counterplay. All mobs are inherently weaker after the addition of the shield because as of now, there's very little that they can do to counter a blocking player. If there was a little more that the player had to think about, rather than just holding up the shield and backing away, PvE could be more interesting. Maybe creeper explosions could disable a shield similarly to axes? This would provide a bit of a nerf to shields without making them entirely pointless. Additionally, if players could parry attacks with a shield by timing blocks properly, while technically being a buff, would add a little bit more active gameplay to speed up combat. Another addition in 1.9 was the elytra, which gave players a fun new method of aerial transportation. It was fast, but it wasn't reliable for the distance that minecarts were, and couldn't travel over water for very long, unlike boats. Elytras then became the most overpowered feature in the entire game in 1.11.1, when firework rockets were given the ability to propel the player through the sky. Elytras once again theoretically add another option for the player when it comes to movement, but nullify all other methods of travel due to their superiority. Horses, minecarts, and boats all interacted in a rock-paper-scissors-like way where each was better in certain circumstances. Now, the elytra is better than all of them in every circumstance. And sure, it's a late-game item, but it's still much easier to get than the value it provides would lead you to believe. The elytra outclasses every other kind of transportation in the game, so some kind of adjustment seems to be necessary. Removing the functionality of fireworks would be too radical of a change for many players, but a buff to other transportation could bring it more in balance with the elytra. I would like Mojang to rework minecarts to make them more viable later into the game, as well as giving them more uses in niche situations. This video by Nice Name goes into detail and shares some interesting ideas about how this could be implemented. Even though Mojang has shifted their philosophy when it comes to Minecraft, this doesn't mean that the old philosophy needs to be put to the wayside entirely. Obviously, both methods of game design have led to the creation of a very successful game. Cemented features that don't agree with the modern direction Minecraft is going can be updated, but band-aid solutions won't cut it. Changes need to be well thought out, especially if they are heavily modifying or nullifying existing features. If Mojang wants to make less of Minecraft's challenges mandatory, that's okay, but they need to make sure that the player still has options. Adaptability when faced with an emergent problem is one of the most important qualities of a competent Minecraft player. Requiring players to solve problems with specific predetermined solutions rejects this idea.